Wake that ass up.
Early in the morning.
The Breakfast Club.
Morning, everybody. It's DJ MV, Angela Yee, Charlamagne the Guy. We are the Breakfast Club. We got a special guest in the building.
Yes, sir.
David John. Welcome back, sir.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate you being
Good morning, my brother.
Good morning, good morning.
How are you?
Doing all right.
Now, today is National HIV Testing Day.
Yes.
Yes, it is.
Yes, it is.
And you come up here every year during this time to spread awareness and tell people how they can get tested.
And
Yes.
we also are doing testing at Juices for Life in Brooklyn.
Yes.
And that's going to be on Saturday.
Excited about that. Yes, thank you for the opportunity.
So let's talk about it a little bit.
Yeah, this is an annual day, an opportunity for us to be reminded that we are still dealing with the HIV epidemic. It has been more than 2 decades, and Black and Latino, Latinx communities continue to be hit hardest. I appreciate now that we are beyond believing that this is a gay disease or something that just affects gay people. We have a lot of conversation, particularly over the last year, around Black women, women of color, Latinx women, and how they're affected. And what we're really hoping is that 3 things happen. One, we take opportunities to cut through the stigma, which I appreciate. This is a platform for us to do that. You guys have been really helpful in that regard. The second thing is to, again, encourage people to get tested. The theme for this year's National HIV Testing Day is Do It In My Way. So put on an Usher CD. Think about what it is that matters to you most. Yeah, some people will get that later. But the point here is that, right, like some people don't like to draw blood. You can swab your mouth. You can get OR-Quick. You can go to the clinic. You can do this at home. There's no reason why you shouldn't know your status and then get connected to care. And then the last thing that we haven't talked much about here, but I think is really important, is that there are people thriving with HIV. Right? I found myself saying over the last couple of weeks, name a highly visible, very public person of color beyond Magic Johnson who is living with HIV.
We don't know.
I don't know.
But factually, that can't be
bunch of
real,
them.
right?
I actually do know some because I've met some people that do come to the juice bar that have told me
Right.
that
Because
they're
you've
HIV
shown up.
positive, and they look like you can. It doesn't look like they're
That's
walking
exactly
around,
right.
struggling. They look just regular. Like
that's
it's
a good
fine.
thing.
People are thriving with HIV.
Yes, and that's a good thing and a bad thing, and I'll tell you why. It's a great thing because people are actually thriving with it and being able to live with it, but it's a bad thing because people aren't taking it as serious as they used to because they don't consider it as life-threatening.
Not all people, right? So it is also the week before World Pride Day in New York, which is where the celebration is. And for white LGBTQ people and for white people generally, HIV is not really a thing, right? The rates in those communities are so low, both with regard to transmission and with regard to people who are actually living with HIV, that in many ways it's something that they can move past. But that's just simply not true for us. And so it's incredibly important to take advantage of days like this, but also every other day to have conversations to ensure that people get tested and to lift up and support people who are thriving with the virus.
Now, how often should people get tested?
The CDC recommends every 6 months, generally. Again, and this is for people who are not in committed monogamous relationships where they don't have to consider things like this. But for people who are in high-risk categories, right? Black women in particular, Black men who have sex with men, which is a category the CDC uses, which is problematic because they lump in Black trans women who are not men who have sex with men. They recommend that it's every 3 months.
I do it every year when we do our testing events.
Yep, I appreciate it.
That's interesting because you said that because I had a conversation with 2 white men, and they said they would rather have HIV than herpes, and I was like,
Where'd that come from?
because
Unpack that for
in
me.
their mind they think that herpes is the outbreak, and they think that it's visible and you can see it, but with HIV you don't necessarily see it, and you can thrive with it.
So both are problematic, right? And so, and this is why spaces like this are really important. And Words Matter, we have a toolkit, Words Matter HIV, that in part highlights this. When HIV was first introduced, people used to talk about it and want us to imagine that it was a virus that was bubbling up in somebody's body and at any point might ooze on to somebody else, right?
Yeah.
That's also how people walked around thinking it was a death sentence and you could actually identify somebody living with HIV. The reality is that it doesn't work like that. And so we should be mindful of the fact that one who is HIV positive is more susceptible to being infected with other sexually transmitted infections, which is now the term the CDC uses, but that there are ways to prevent becoming positive or infected, period.
All right. You
Now
think
also-
we'll ever see an end to HIV?
We definitely can, and it's possible in our lifetime, but it requires us, especially as Black and brown people, having more conversations and also medical providers doing a better job. So some of this is on us, right? We have to do a better job of having these conversations, cutting through the stigma and walking with our friends, ensuring that they get connected to care. But medical providers also have to do a better job, right? Like we shouldn't assume that it's easy for us to go to doctors, that doctors are culturally competent, that they understand what it means for us to be having these conversations in our community. And so the responsibility is shared. But the short answer to your question is yes, it is possible to end HIV in our lifetime.
What about insurance, right? We've been seeing all these debates now.
Yeah.
The debates were on last night and they're on again tonight, and everybody's talking about Medicare for
Yeah.
all, or should we have private insurance companies? How does that factor in if you do find out you're HIV positive? Is insurance, is it very expensive, or does insurance really cover a lot of that?
So I appreciate the question. It is critically important, and we should expect that as the presidential debates continue to unfold, that this will be a continued discussion. The current administration, the Republican Party, continue to attack the Affordable Care Act, and what we know is that the Affordable Care Act was significantly important, not only to black and brown people generally, but to individuals who are living with HIV, in part because without the protections of the Affordable Care Act, insurance companies can drop individuals for what they might otherwise deem a pre-existing condition. Beyond that, yes, drugs are expensive. A part of what came up in the conversation last night is how drug companies and manufacturers often have monopolies that allow them to charge whatever they want to, right? I think I've talked about in this space before when we talked about your son in prep, how expensive that pill is. I had insurance and was paying $50 a month for that pill before a single father or someone who has student loans or who's living the average life of an American, that just is prohibitive. And so we have to be clear that everyone should be voting, not simply because some of our ancestors died for that right, but because these decisions have consequences, and they often cost, literally and figuratively they cost.
Now, you mentioned PrEP, and I was going to ask about that. Now, PrEP is a pill that you take every day that prevents HIV. Is that correct? I just want to make sure.
Yep.
Now, we read a story maybe a couple of months ago, and they were saying that there were people getting HIV by taking that pill. Is that true?
So there is one case that has been discussed of someone who has been on PrEP and who is HIV positive. And there are lots of questions connected to this case, things that we simply don't know. The biggest one is, were they taking it every day, right? So PrEP is, think about birth control.
Right, you got to take it every day.
You have to take it every day.
Or you got to double up the next day if you miss it.
And really the distinction here is that you can't double up, right, the next day. And so some of this is about it being a consistent practice, but it also being a part of a larger health regimen. So you cannot take the pill and then think that you are Superman. It just doesn't work that way. And so there are some people that believe that it provides you with this level of invincibility that you can then otherwise be reckless. And so we have to be mindful of that.
You know, give me a history lesson, because it is Pride Month.
Yeah.
And I saw you post that Pride Month was created by a black trans woman.
Period. Full stop. Period.
Let me get that history lesson.
Yeah, so I appreciate the question. What few people appreciate is that Pride Month is a reflection of Stonewall. And Stonewall is often, again, media terms matter. People refer to it as a riot. It was not a riot. It was a resistance. At this point in time, in particular, New York had a law that said that patrons who were LGBTQ, again, how you know that, we could talk about that a whole nother time, should not be served alcohol, right? It was this belief that they were already raucous and alcohol would amplify things, and we were concerned about people being comported in the streets. And so it allowed for organizations like Stonewall, who was controlled by the mafia, right, the inn, the restaurant, to create spaces where they could provide alcohol to people that otherwise wouldn't be served in other places. And so in Stonewall, they frequently were raided by the police who were enforcing these policies, and also just because that was the relationship at the time. And they would flip on a red light and everybody was supposed to scatter and act like it wasn't the kind of space that it was. And on this night in particular, it was a black trans woman who at the time was not called trans. Again, that's a word that we use now. She was a drag performer. To be clear, she was a black person in a white establishment, so it was not a welcoming environment generally. But she said hell no when the police came in that night and threw a shot glass. Wow. It's referred to as a shot glass heard around the world. That night and then in the days that followed, LGBTQ people of all races and ethnicities stood in the street and resisted the police otherwise saying to them that they can't gather in a safe space. That's really important because often pride celebrations now are featured or provide space for white people, white gay men, white lesbian women, sometimes now trans people, bi people are usually erased. The rest of the acronym doesn't really exist. And in particular, black trans women are seldom seen in those spaces. This is really important for me as I think about what pride means as a black man and what black pride means, in particular because we've lost 6 black trans women this month alone that we know of.
Right.
Really?
Really. And it's been really hard because every time I found myself saying that sentence, somebody in the room would say like, no, there was another one last night. or no, there was one this morning.
Wow.
And we don't even talk about it, right? We
Yeah,
didn't even
Cory Booker
name, we
mentioned
didn't
it
even say
last
these
night.
things. Corey did, and I appreciate him doing it, but the candidates need to not only talk more about it, but do more about it, right? In Jacksonville, Florida, there were 6 black trans women murdered last year alone. Right, and the first responders, the police, are misgendering them, dead naming them, not using their correct name. There's seldom an investigation. There's seldom any form of justice, and what that means is that black trans women are living rightfully so in fear. And so there's this interesting contradiction when white people can wear rainbows and be celebrated by corporations that are profiting off of the pain of black queer people who often do the work, but who seldom benefit from those investments.
I see so many corporations right now doing like special limited edition Pride.
Rainbow everything.
Rainbows on every sneaker.
Yes, I see
shirts.
liquor companies doing it. I see different clothing lines. I see different campaigns.
Yeah.
So do you think that the commercialization of that is a negative thing, or do you think that it's normalizing what some people might not have thought before much about?
I think it's both. It's a reflection of how white supremacy works, right? And often what I am mindful of is that it benefits white organizations, right? Like HRC wins. They just recently announced that they have a leadership transition. There's a man of color, a black gay man, who's from Liberia, who's taken over. So they're shifting, but typically these organizations receive the resources and then do nothing with regard to investing in our community.
Right.
And so I really challenge people to move beyond the visceral response to want to invest in a pride campaign and then pat yourself on the back and feel like you're an ally, and really think about moving to accompliceship, right? What are you doing on a daily basis outside of June? Not just going to a gala, not watching Will and Grace, not putting an HRC bumper sticker on your door, but what are you doing to support the lives of people who are furthest away from power but are most affected by the decisions that people in power make?
You know, we talked at the Can We Talk benefit dinner. Congratulations, because you got the Compassionate Justice Award.
Surprising honor. I was humbled by that.
But you said something at the table that I thought was so powerful, and I never had heard anybody break it down like that. You said why you did not like the term ally.
Yeah.
Could you break that down?
Yeah, for that reason, words matter, and 2 things to consider. Allyship, first and foremost, says that I'm not them, right? So it says that like there's something going on with that community, right? If I'm a well-meaning white person and I'm talking about black people, it says like there's something going on with them, and we need to acknowledge it or at least talk about it. But before we get into anything, I want y'all to know that I ain't them. And so in particular with regard to LGBTQIA or same gender loving people, again, I use same gender loving because gay as a white political identifier has very little to do with my lived experience. What I want people to do is to shift and acknowledge, I don't need you othering, I don't need you identifying, I need you leveraging your privilege so that we have access to things that we otherwise don't have access to, right? So do you provide a seat at the table, literally thinking about Taraji and the Boris Lawrence Henson Foundation, a seat at the table for people that otherwise wouldn't have that platform, who are doing the work to be sure, but wouldn't have that platform? Do you open up your business to provide resources to a community that otherwise wouldn't have them because they're overlooked when people are thinking about those who have the greatest need? The goal should be to be disruptive, and to do so not in ways that solicit false praise or surface level praise, but that actually allow people to get free.
So what's the proper way to be of service, I guess?
It's to show up and be a better human, right? It is to think about what's required so that we can celebrate empathy. I tell people all the time, I don't need you to approve or accept or to validate how I show up in the world and who I love. I could give 2 shits, right? What is important to me, however, is that people don't leverage their own biases to deny access to opportunity, right? This came up again in the presidential debate. It'll come up going forward. Black people live in spaces where it's still legal to discriminate against us.
Yeah.
And we have been lulled into thinking that like we're protected in part because Obama was in office, Michelle Obama's fly and fine, right? Like there are examples of people who are benefiting the economy for a lot of people who aren't struggling in significant ways. It makes them feel indifferent about some of this stuff. But there are laws, there are 8 states where it's legal to discriminate against people based on actual or perceived sexual identity, gender orientation, or gender expression, which means that on top of racism and all the other stuff you get as a manifestation of colonization and transatlantic enslavement, you have people that literally can use laws to deny people access to public accommodations, hospitals, restaurants, hotels, things of the sort.
Right.
So we have to do a much better job of not only shifting our practice as individuals, but changing policy so that people can take up space.
How accurate is the home HIV test?
With regard to identifying the extent to which one is positive,
yes,
I believe that the stats are around there better than 80%. Some of it depends on timing, and usually what happens is that's a first step indication. You then want to follow with a visit to a clinician. Right. For people who are unsure where to start, I encourage you to visit our website, www.nbjc.com. If you put in your zip code on our homepage, we'll identify a free testing center in the community near you.
All right. Well, just so you guys know, we are doing yet again free testing. And if you get tested, you do get a free juice. So we're providing that for anybody who gets tested. I know y'all love to come get a free juice. And so that's at Juices for Life in Brooklyn, 277 Malcolm X Boulevard. We'll be there from 12 to 4:30. 12 to 4:30.
Yep. Come through, get tested.
Yes.
Tell them the date. Is Saturday or Sunday?
Saturday. And also, just want to acknowledge too, we lost the life of one of our brothers. I talked about him at that event. Nigel Shelby, 15-year-old black boy in Huntsville, Alabama, who not only had to deal with the vestiges of white supremacy and anti-blackness, but was also bullied because he was gay. Had a mother, a father, a family that loved him, that knew that he was perfect just as God created him, but went to schools in a community where the adults failed to do the work required to ensure that classrooms and the spaces babies are forced to move through were safe and supportive. And as a result, he died by suicide. This is not specific to him. Over the last 20 years, we've seen the suicide rates amongst young kids, black and brown kids of color, boys in particular, increase. Recently, the Congressional Black Caucus established an emergency task force to deal with black youth mental health and suicide. Taraji testified, as did I. And so this is just a beseechment, a plea really, for educators, for caring and concerned adults, for parents, guardians, people that do direct service work with young people, to acknowledge that our babies are beautifully diverse. They're saying to us that the categories and boxes that we've created, like boy, girl, straight, gay, don't really work for them. And we have an obligation to update our vocabulary and to shift our practice so that they can feel safe. It does not make sense to me that children, none of whom asked to be born, have to think that they don't have any other option than to die by suicide. And whenever that happens, that's on us. So we have to do better.
You think teachers and in the school system, they should have some type of extra, I guess, something for the teachers so that when things like this come up, that they know how to handle it? Yeah,
the reality is that teachers, anyone who works with kids is required by law to report whenever we believe that a child or a young person might harm themselves or other people. So this is one of the things that we are concerned about and looking into with regard to the investigation, working with Ben Crump and Jasmine Rand in that regard. But yes, teachers should have pre-service training, in-service training so that they know how to respond, so that they can identify early warning signs. One of the things we're working on with the Black Caucus and the American Psychological Association is helping to increase the rate of training. The reality is that there are more school resource officers, police officers in schools than there are mental health counselors, right? Given all of the trauma and toxic stress that our students experience. There was a UCLA study that said that when Klan president was running for office, there were students that were talking about feeling the tension in schools, and we can imagine that that's been exacerbated, right? Hate crimes and increases in that kind of data would affirm that. So what I'm saying is that school systems, superintendents have to do a better job of leveraging resources like those provided by organizations like the National Black Justice Coalition to support our babies. And if people don't want to do this work, that's fine, then just move the hell out of the way. Right? Our students have to go to schools, but adults can make other decisions. Our babies deserve better.
That's real.
All right. Well, we appreciate you for joining us.
Appreciate
David Johns, give me your Twitters and Instagrams and all that.
Mr. David Johns across platforms. Also follow NBJC on the Move. All of the information about National HIV Testing Day is on there. We're also having a Twitter chat this afternoon at 2, so you can find more information. If there are other questions, you can hit us up on there. I appreciate y'all.
And if you think he's talking fast, it's because he has a flight to catch.
That's
Thank
right.
you. We
Never
appreciate
not
it.
working.
It's David Johns. It's The Breakfast Club. Positive Notes up next.